Ever since I was young, my grandmother would always tell us scary stories to try to freak my sister and I out. Often, when she would go do laundry in the basement, we'd come with her, and a series of lights were on that only lit up a very pitch-black basement for a couple of yards. She would always stop us and make us stare into the distance while we were under the protection of the light and point to the blackness, saying, "Do you see him? Right there. The Boogeyman." I would always quake and shiver as a child with interest, while my older sister would burst into tears. I always passed it off as my imagination, but I felt I could always see a tall, faint black outline among the black and just the slightest glimmer of red eyes. Fast forward 10 years or so, and my sister and her boyfriend have made a section of the basement a living quarter, with large cuts of rugs for walls. The rugs met together to close and create this corner section that made a door basically, and by walking through the two slits you would enter their room. They had a couch in there, and I at the time was sitting downstairs on it, watching TV and hanging out, while my sister decided to go upstairs for a moment to talk to my grandmother, and her boyfriend stayed. He was sitting in bed on his phone across the room. A couple of minutes go by and I get that weird static-like feeling of somebody walking towards me on the other side of the rug. You know the feeling when something or someone is suddenly in your presence and you can just feel it before you even see it? It was that feeling. I also thought I heard faint footsteps, and I think to myself it must be my sister trying to sneak up on me and scare me like she always tried to do, since I don't scare easy. I decide to shout out all tough, "You can't scare me. I know you're walking this way, I can hear you." And as soon as I finish that sentence, I hear my sister's voice upstairs through the thin, creaky wood of the house talking to my grandmother. I suddenly look over to her boyfriend, who's looking at me like I'm a nutcase, and the figure I feel to the right of me gets taller, closer. My ears start ringing, and I freeze, feeling a huge weight on my chest, unable to move. I could just feel something not even 1 foot away from me on the other side of the rug, and the only people who would be down there were all accounted for. After what felt like hours of this pressure, which was more like 30 seconds, I could feel it back away, like it was walking backwards, and the pressure on my body released. And when I tried to tell my sister or her boyfriend what happened, they refused to listen, because they didn't want me to freak them out since they were of course living down there. A few days later, I'm upstairs and decide to tell my grandmother and dad sitting in the TV room what happened, because I know they both have said they've experienced paranormal situations before. I mean, my grandmother lived in a haunted house when she was younger, but that's a whole other story. The weird thing is, as soon as I started talking about this thing that happened to me in the basement, the TV gets all staticky and loses connection. I stop and it goes back to normal, then continue talking about it and it happens again. Mind you, it was a bright, sunny summer day, so nothing was particularly causing this that I knew of. My dad also noticed the TV doing this and told me it was probably best to stop, to not talk about it anymore, and my grandmother agreed. My grandmother has passed away since then, and my sister and her boyfriend moved out. I still have a huge fear of being alone down in that basement. When I was a kid, I think I was in 3rd or 4th grade, my mom was a new police officer. She often had to work the night shift, and I would stay at my grandparents' house for the night because my dad wasn't around. My grandpa lived in a 2-story house with a basement. It was an open basement, and I wouldn't really call it one thinking about it now. It was more like a sub-second floor, because there wasn't a door separating it, and it wasn't directly under the house. There was a small 7-step staircase that led down there. In this sub-second floor, there was a living room, laundry room, bedroom, and bathroom. The room down there was my room, but I absolutely hated it. It scared me, and any time I had to sleep in there, I asked for someone to sleep in the other bed so I wasn't alone. The person who usually did that was my grandma, but she had passed away a year earlier. So one night, my mom dropped me off before work. My uncle and his girlfriend were in town and staying with my grandpa in his spare bedroom upstairs, the room I usually slept in. meaning I had to sleep in the room downstairs. I dreaded this room and begged my grandpa to sleep in it with me, but he couldn't because he had a CPAP. For those who don't know, it's a mask you wear that keeps constant airway pressure for sleep apnea, and he couldn't move it downstairs. My uncle didn't want to sleep down there, so it was just me. In the room there are 2 separate twin-sized beds, one next to the closet and the door, and one next to the far wall. I chose the one next to the wall. My grandpa tucked me in, and before turning off the light, I asked him to keep it on. He knew how scared I was, so he obliged. I stayed up, staring at the ceiling for a while, until I turned to face the wall and fell asleep. I woke up in the middle of the night. I don't know what time. I was still facing the wall. I could feel something off. Something was odd, and my subconscious kept me from turning around to look. A minute of staring at the wall and trying to fall back asleep later, I heard a little shuffling from behind me. Maybe it's my grandpa checking up on me, I thought to myself. I decided that I'd just pretend to be asleep and close my eyes. The shuffling stopped right by my bed, and I could feel something lean in directly over my ear, and it screamed. A blood-curdling, I'm being murdered scream. I was frozen in place staring at the wall. The scream lasted for a minute at least, with no stops for breath or change in pitch. I was absolutely terrified, and once it did stop, I didn't hear anything leave or the shuffling again. I didn't turn around to run out of the room. I just laid there, scared to death. Once the sun rose and my grandpa came to wake me up, I asked him with tears rolling down my eyes.
Did you hear someone scream last night?
He responded with,
No, I didn't. What happened?
and I told him, but he just wrote it off as it was just a nightmare. And back then I didn't believe that. But when I got older, I did write it off as a nightmare. Until last night. It's been 10 years, and I was sleeping on the couch in my mom's apartment when I woke up and had that same feeling I did that night. I turned to look this time and saw nothing, but it was pretty dark. So I flipped back around and closed my eyes, and the scream happened again. I was too terrified to move just like before, and I just laid there. I thought I'd post this here and see what you guys thought, or if you've had any of the same experiences, because I'm convinced that it's not a nightmare. This happened a couple of years ago. I don't like talking about it that much. It never seemed like a big deal to me as a kid, but the older I get, the more I think about it, and the more it haunts me. It was New Year's Eve 2011, and me and a couple of my friends were having a sleepover. My friend's neighborhood was relatively new, so there were still houses being built around him. We had all stayed up until midnight, but were all hyped up on sugar and had no intention of sleep. One of my friends had the idea of going to play hide and seek in one of the houses being built. We asked his mom, and she was okay with it, but she gave us her phone to hold and told us to text my friend's dad in case anything happened. We took the phone, got our coats on, and headed outside. The house was only 100 yards away from the front porch, so it wasn't that far of a walk. We jogged across the street since it was relatively windy out. We didn't want to stay in the cold air. We decided to play in pairs, but if you were hiding, you had to stay with your teammate. I volunteered to be a seeker, so the 2 hiders headed into the house, while the other seeker and I began to count. Once I hit 60, the game began. The house was dark and cold, and the only source of light was the bright moon shining through every window and door. We were standing in the empty shell of someone's home. No inner walls had been put up yet, and there was no carpeting on the floors. The only thing on the inside were dozens of thick wooden beams. I told my friend I'd take the first floor if he wanted the second, and he agreed. He walked past me and up the stairs, and I was now alone. Something about being in there boosted my confidence, like I was an adventurer or something. I walked around the first floor with a smile on my face, braver than ever. I called out to my friends, trying to hold in my laughter. Since the house was so dark, You could only see about 5 feet in front of you, so I made sure to check every nook and cranny. That's when I found the basement. It was a dark and eerie hole in the floor. It looked like it would swallow anything that walked into it. I doubted they were down there, but I had checked the entire first floor and heard nothing from my friend upstairs, so I sucked it up and began down the steps. I walked down slowly, taking careful steps, because it was nearly impossible to see anything. My footsteps echoed throughout the dark room. I crept around carefully, listening for any type of noise in the darkness, and then I heard something, the slow moving of feet. "Hello?" I said, following with my friends' names. No response. For a quick second I contemplated turning back around, but I knew if this was them, they wouldn't say anything back. I called out their names again. No response. A smile came across my face. I had found them. "Come on out," I said, as I walked towards the source of the noise. "I heard you guys move." I began to see the silhouette of something in the corner of the basement. It was a person, but only one. "Didn't we say the hiders had to stay together?" I said. They didn't move, just stayed crouched down in the corner facing the wall. I began to walk closer, fully convinced it was one of my friends. "Hey, I found you. You're out," I said. I continued to walk closer, but I still wasn't close enough to make out any body features. Whoever it was breathing rather loudly, loud enough for me to hear it from a couple feet away. Me being the naive kid I was, still thinking it was one of my friends just trying to scare me, I smiled. I didn't know what else to do, but I wouldn't take a step closer. That's when the breathing was overpowered by laughter and loud footsteps from upstairs. "I found you," I heard through the ceiling. I quickly turned around and ran back upstairs to see who was found, hoping whoever was in the basement with me would follow. I waited on the first floor as I heard them coming down the steps. "Got 'em both," my friend said as he came into my view. I stood there, a confused look on my face. How did he find both of them? I thought to myself. But to my surprise, here came both of the hiders, walking down the stairs. My heart dropped. I felt the blood rush out of my face and my legs go weak. I slowly turned around and stumbled towards the front door without saying a word. "Where are you going?" they asked. I couldn't speak. There was only one thought in my head at this time. Who was in the basement with me? I made it to the front door, slowly turned the knob, slipped outside and began running back to the house. I wanted to get as far away as I could. I began to feel tears welling up in my eyes. I made it to my friend's front porch and collapsed, barely being able to catch my breath because I was so hysterical. I laid there for what felt like ages when I heard my friends come up behind me. I don't even remember what they were saying. All I could think about was the person in the basement. After I calmed down, I told them what had happened, and they all seemed as freaked out as me. The fact that I had talked directly to the person for so long is what scared me so much. We decided not to tell his parents. I didn't sleep for about a week after that, and I still have nightmares about it sometimes. A few months after that night, the house was finished and a family moved in, and I never heard any complaints about a squatter or anything. The older I get, the more I've come to realize it was probably a crackhead or something. And sometimes I feel guilty because I know we probably could have helped them, but it is still terrifying to me. It's crazy to think about what might have happened. When I was about 7, my dad was in charge of a company that, due to financial issues, had to lower their employees' payments. A lot of employees were outraged and they went on strike. There was a lot of action centered around my house. One morning, I was on the couch watching TV when I saw a guy standing in the hallway. I thought it was my dad until I saw that the man was missing his left leg. He hobbled away and I went after him. After turning the corner, I saw that the man had disappeared. I went up to tell my parents about it. Immediately after that, a gunshot went through the window, right where I was sitting before. If I hadn't gotten up to follow the figure, I would have been shot. The police identified the shooter as a worker of my dad's company who was on strike. A few years later, when I was about 10, I was falling asleep when the closet door opened. In the dim light, I could see a figure standing in the doorway. It was missing its left leg. I screamed and turned on the lamp next to my bed. When I turned back, the figure was gone. My parents rushed in to see why I screamed. When I told them, they believed me because of what had happened a few years ago. The next part was experienced by my sisters and their babysitter because I was at a friend's house. They were sitting around with the TV on when they heard knocking on the wall. They were the only ones in the house. They got up to go investigate, and then they heard the knocking on the opposite side of the house. And when they went there, it happened in a different spot. They just sat there in their living room, huddled together, as the house filled with knocking, even in places that should have been impossible to reach. When my parents came home, the knocking stopped. My sisters and the babysitter told my parents what had happened, and my parents paid the babysitter double for having to go through it. We decided that it was the last straw. We were going to move. When we were in the basement gathering things, I came across a wooden left leg. That house burned down just 2 weeks after we moved out, and it still gives me the creeps thinking about it. Okay, let me begin by saying that I have always been very intrigued by the paranormal, but never really found myself to be a complete believer of such, until this happened to me. So about a year ago, it was my mom's birthday, and she had some big golden balloons in the living room left over from her party for about 2 weeks. After the 2 weeks, I finally comment on the balloons, asking her if she thinks it's time to get rid of them, to which she responds, "I just want them to deflate and go away on their own." So, I minded my own business and let her do what she wanted with her balloons. Later that day, I see one of the balloons moving towards my front door, as if it wanted to go outside. Not thinking much about it, I made a joke saying how the balloons are feeling like hostages at this point and want to leave, then continue to go on about my day. Later that same night, when I returned home with my girlfriend, I hear my mom yell for me. We hurry into the kitchen, where she is standing with her phone recording the movement of this balloon. It's moving around in circles. Now here is where things start to get really weird. Right when my girlfriend and I get into the kitchen, the balloon stops circling and begins floating very steadily towards my basement stairs, almost as if it was waiting for a crowd. Now when I tell you this balloon was moving with a mind of its own, I mean it. We watched as it perfectly descended down my stairs and into my basement, making all the perfect twists and turns to get down there, without touching anything. When it gets down there, I shit you not, we watched this balloon move steadily to a solo headshot picture of myself, then one of my sister, then one of my mom and aunt. After it seemingly examined my family's pictures, it slowly moved to my uncle's face, who he called to come watch with us because we were so fucking rattled. The balloon waited there for a second, then moved away to the corner of the room, where it stayed completely still for about 5 minutes. As we all sat there trying to piece together what the fuck just happened, my uncle, who sleeps in one of the rooms in my basement, asked us if we would take the balloon back upstairs because he was freaked out by it. So we did. But my girlfriend and I, being the curious cats that we are, were still intrigued and in shock over what had just happened, so we decided to put it back in the kitchen and just see what it would do. It took about 2 minutes for the balloon to take the exact same route to the basement, but this time, when it got to the basement, it went straight to that same back corner and just floated there, so I decided to go investigate that corner a little. At this point in time, my girlfriend was actually terrified, and was only really investigating with me because I wanted to. So as I went to investigate that corner, she stayed at the bottom of the stairs and watched. Now this is when things really pieced together for me, and I had no doubt in my mind that there was some kind of presence near us. As I walked to the back corner where the balloon was, my heart skipped a beat, and I felt chills as I noticed that in that same corner where the balloon kept going to was my family's Ouija board just sitting underneath the table. Now at this point, I wanted to show my girlfriend that the Ouija board was right there, but I knew she would run if I told her. So I looked her in her eyes and said, "Okay, this is really freaky, but I'm going to show you what I just found. And I need you not to run upstairs because then I'll be left down here alone, and I will be freaked the hell out." To which she replied,
Okay.
and guys, I shit you not, when I went to reach for this Ouija board, the coffee table and chair that were about 3 feet away from me at the time slammed together, as if there was some sort of magnetic attraction. It made an insanely loud noise and scared the piss out of me. So I ran to the stairs where I physically picked my girlfriend up and carried her up the stairs because she wasn't moving fast enough. I still have no answers or explanation for this, but I must say that this experience really made me a believer of the paranormal. This is something that I encountered maybe 13 years ago or so. I was living in a finished basement of a friend's house for a few months, after I had lost my house in a personal economic downfall. I've always had a collection of gadgets and electronics which followed me to this place. Long story short, I had a black and white surveillance camera that I was playing with out of boredom. I believe this was more of a chance happening than anything else, and I have not been able to reproduce the results. It scared the crap out of me. On one wall of the basement there was a massive mirror that went from floor to ceiling. On the other was a 25-inch television that I had the camera attached to. I was also recording on a VCR. At one point, I was playing with the video feedback between the mirror and the television, bending the image, and just moving it around to record a trippy tunnel effect. When I aimed the camera at the top corner of the tunnel, it produced a different white noise effect, and also had quite an interesting audio feedback associated with it. I continued to experiment with this particular area of the image until something very unsettling occurred. The white noise began to fade, and several distorted figures began to appear in the mirror. The figures became a little more clear as I adjusted the camera's position, and it appeared that they were definitely aware of what I was doing. One figure was rather tall, and sitting in a large throne-like chair. The other three were surrounding the chair, pointing at me. They all had these hideous grins. Their bodies appeared human and they were wearing clothes, but their faces definitely appeared disfigured or demonic. As soon as I saw these beings pointing and grinning at me, I threw down the camera and ran out of the house. It was terrifying. Later, I reviewed the tape, and it had shown a bit more than I had seen while recording. Specifically when I was toying with the white noise, there were other images of faces sort of coming through a fog. I took the tape to my mother, who was equally frightened and could not watch the whole thing. Soon after all of this, the tape ended up missing. I'm sure it was my mother who got rid of it, even though she denies it. I'm not sure if it was just the particular setting or what other variables would have to occur, such as being at a very low point in my life where that type of entity would be around me, but I will probably not try to reproduce this again. Hey guys and ladies, thanks for watching. Send your story or creepypasta to the email in the description. And also my shirts, my Patreon, my Twitter and my Instagram, and some other shit's probably down there, so I don't think I have anything to talk about, so we'll just get to the skit. So be good to animals, even people. Sit.
Okay, come on, a couple more steps.
Can I look yet, Dad?
No, keep your eyes closed. And don't peek like a bitch. I hate shit like that.
Okay.
We're almost there. Okay, go ahead and look.
What? A new car? Thanks, Dad.
Happy birthday, son.
I love it.
Look, I know things have been tough. The death threats, the media, those are just things that come with my job. I hope you understand.
Yeah, I know. It's okay. It's not your fault.
All right, well, what are you waiting for? Take it for a spin.
Okay.
Ja, snämmar, bergsbes, hörs.
Is it the bird? Do you got a stinky ass? What is it? Whoa. You're gonna show them, huh? You will be showing them.